Okay, so I hit the record button.
Okay.
I have to give you another update on the state of my country because
Yeah.
shit's happening here,
Yeah.
and it's kind of dark actually right now where we are in the historical moment. So last time we talked, I told you I'm about to go to a protest, right?
Think so.
Right. So it's been 2 weeks since then. There were 2 weeks of protests on the weekends, and
And those made international news. They that was a big story here. They had all these photographs of thousands of people. Um, not, I mean, in a lot of Russian cities, right?
yeah, that's one of the ways this was different from before. Um, the geography of it. There were a lot of cities, including smaller cities, and cities like my girlfriend is from a city in the far north,
Hmm.
not a big town, and they had like 5,000, that which for that place is a lot of people in cold. Um, and and none of these were sanctioned. So that is this. I don't know how deep I want to go into the history of Russian protest movement, but early on there was this, I think, a mistake that was made by the protesters, the democratic movement, let's say, which was when the first big waves of protests were starting in 2011. Um, there was this one protest that was, it was clear it was going to be big. There was a place that people decided on. We're going to go to the square of the revolution, and the city administration said you can't go there. So this is like an important place, and it's central, and it's like if a lot of people gather there, there would be a bigger splash. And so the city hall said can go there, but you can go to this other place. It's still in the central part of the city, but easier to kind of fence off. It's basically an island, so the police can basically block the exit if needed, and not is not as significant as this other one. And so the debate then was, on the one hand, if we agree to a change of location, then we're giving away our right to decide where we're going to gather. But if we don't agree, then the rally is not going to be sanctioned, is not going to be legal in the eyes of the administration, and so they would be rougher, they would arrest some people, and fewer people will show up, most
Hmm.
importantly, because people were already afraid of the thing. And so there was a little bit of a clash within the movement, and so most people went to the safe place, the allowed place, and a small group of like marginal radicals went to the other one. And that established this dichotomy. There is a sanctioned protest and a protest that's not sanctioned. And the
Hmm.
latter is more dangerous, and fewer people show up. Now, 10 years later, you can't really do a sanctioned one. They just don't allow much. And and so this time, none of these were quote unquote sanctioned, and yet a lot of people turned up.
Hmm.
The other thing that was different is we hit record numbers. I think in the history of modern Russia, record numbers for people detained at these things.
Huh.
Several thousand, I think like 7,000 maybe all over the country. Moscow
Wow.
and St. Petersburg both ran out of place to keep people, so they started taking them to towns nearby,
Hmm.
and the police was rougher. There are a lot of videos, really troubling videos of just peaceful protesters in the street, not doing anything, not causing any trouble, and then a bunch of riot police in gear with sticks start beating people up. that kind of thing. There are even a few, it's not very common, but there are a few, and that's few too many, reports of violence, torture basically, at the stations, at the police stations. So all of that is troubling. And then most importantly, the, part of the reason, a big part of the reason for these protests is Navalny's return and immediate detention at first. And then they had a hearing and they gave him 2 years and 8 months in prison.
And what's his crime?
This is a completely fabricated case from earlier. This is not the first time he was sentenced to jail time. A few years ago, they created this. Honestly, I don't even remember all of the details. It's some very sketchy thing. His brother, I hope I'm not misremembering this. His brother had like a logistics company, and they were doing business with Yves Rocher, this Western cosmetics firm. And somehow the case, it's been a few years since I followed it closely, so I don't remember the details now, but it's very clear that the case is fabricated and doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's fraud, basically. Navalny, who was not even a part of this thing, it's his brother who was actually involved, is accused of somehow making, I think the case is somehow makes it seem that he made profit and so he stole money. The details are not important. It's a completely fabricated case of a few years back. They made it, and then they gave him, I think, 3.5 years. And then mysteriously the next day it was reversed. They decided, I'm not sure what the correct English term is, suspended.
Suspended sentence?
Maybe, yeah. So he was given 3.5 years in jail, and then right after, a lot of people showed up in the streets, and it's still not clear. Navalny's idea is people turned out to the central streets of their cities, and that's why the sentence was reversed to become suspended sentence. It's not actually obvious that this is the reason. It could be something else. It didn't make a lot of sense at the time for the government to say you're going to jail and then the next day to kind of go back on it. But it seems that their reasoning was, we're going to give him the suspended sentence to scare him off, because now any small misdemeanor of his turns into 3.5 years very easily. And so now he returned back from getting better, getting out of a coma in Germany after being poisoned and basically a failed assassination attempt. And they said the terms of that suspended sentence made it clear that you need to show up at the appropriate institution 2 times a week or something. And he was showing up once a week, or he missed a few of those dates that they gave him. And most importantly, the a part of their case is you were supposed to show up, you got out of the hospital on a certain date, and then you didn't show up. And he's like, I'm in Germany trying to get better after almost having been killed. And where I was. And the case, the accusation is the institution didn't know where he is. We need to know where the person under the suspended sentence is. And he's like, the president of the country talked about how I'm in Berlin.
Wow.
Anyway, so they just reversed the thing. They gave him, they reversed the suspended sentence. They made it into a real sentence. And since it's been 7 months since, or whatever time has passed, the 3.5 years turned into 2 years and 8 months.
That's so bizarre.
And now he's, yeah.
What what is? How do you pronounce his name? The opposition leader,
Navalny.
Navalny. Um, what is his goal? I mean, is the opposition really opposed to just to Putin? I mean, what's their end game? Do they want to have real democracy? What's going on?
So he's been active for forever. I mean, he started to gain a little bit of prominence, I think, about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, he was somewhat obscure, still political activist. And he's gone through an evolution, a very noticeable evolution. Like if you look at some of these early videos, he started out with a nationalist crowd. And when he started to grow in prominence, that was a problem people had with him. And rightly so. If you look at these early videos he made, like, I don't know, 2008 maybe, they're sketchy. There's like, it's the bad kind of nationalism. You can definitely see some bad kinds of nationalism in there.
When you say nationalism, you mean Russia for Russians kind of thing, and suspicion
Sorta,
of
yeah. There is like, I'm trying to think. There are two clips from his like nationalist past. One is, at that time, one of his things was he was pro-gun ownership, which in Russia, it's not anywhere close to American rules. And there's some clip where he like shoots a terrorist or something. Like, all of these evil people are coming over the border and we are under threat of terrorist attacks. Well, if we just had guns, that'd be easier to solve. And there's some other these are like short clips that have like plot to them. It's a young guy trying to like make snazzy political propaganda, and within that nationalist framework, and it's kind of bizarre to watch those. This other one that I'm thinking about, again, it's been some time that I've since I've seen it, but there are some jokes that are not straightforwardly, you can interpret them, you can get confused as to what he means. But it's some kind of a case for nationalism that's not like neo-Nazism, but a healthier version of it. But it's sketchy. When you first see that, you have questions. But
well, so does this mean that he's maybe not the kind of real pro-democracy, anti-authoritarianism leader that some of us in the West think he is?
No, I think as of now, and as of the last 10 years, give or take 9 years, he's been definitely evolving and growing and becoming better in many different ways. And but the democracy thing was always his big thing. He wants free speech, he wants free elections, open elections for everybody. And then he, since then he tried to run for mayor of Moscow and actually did surprisingly well. It was, again, there was this whole trajectory of like what the authorities, kind of what stance they take and how much freedom they allow has been changing. And like that thing was kind of weird because he was not allowed to do anything, and then suddenly they decided we're going to do mayoral elections in Moscow, and they allowed Navalny to participate. And he had like some very limited time frame, maybe like 2 months or something, to do a campaign when he had no resources except for donations from his followers and volunteer work. And the incumbent, the the guy who's mayor now, Sobyanin, he had TV, he had billboards, he had all of the resources that you could want, and Navalny got 27%, which is a lot, which is I think bigger than any oppositional politician has gotten in any serious election ever in the recent history. So he did that, and then he had a presidential campaign that they did not allow him to enter that, but he still campaigned to try to get into the actual race. And for that one, he had a program for the reforms that he would institute, and democracy, policies geared towards changing Russia to a democratic system, a parliamentary system, are cornerstone there. And the separation of the branches of government, establishing free courts that are independent from the executionary, what do you say that? Executive branch. Executionary might be more appropriate.
That's the old Russia.
Yeah. But no, I've been following him and really supporting him. I've volunteered at a bunch of his campaigns and did various things for him, and was just a part of this whole movement for the last 10 years. And I've been on board with that guy this whole time. I think he's one of the most reasonable, inspiring people that I've seen definitely in the political space.
Does he have any chance?
That is a big question, right? That is hard to say. He's done more than anybody would have expected. He's been more successful than anybody would think he could be. The video that I told you about the last time we talked about this video about the Putin's palace, it has more than 100 million views now, maybe 108 or something.
Wow,
that's unheard of.
Yeah.
And he has a whole network of volunteer organizations around the country that help to get people out and do different kind of political work. But he is funny, it was a cliche for a journalist to ask him all over these years, aren't you afraid they're going to put you in jail or murder you? And so 2020, he's almost murdered. 2021, he is put in jail. So right. Finally, we got the answers to that questions.
What does Putin say about this guy, or what's the official administration view of him? That he's a criminal, or he's not legitimate, or he's a tool of the West, or what do they say?
Sort of all of the above, and then on top of that, he's just not very important. We're not really focusing on him. There's a kind of a bizarre thing going on where I think in all of this time, Putin has never, ever uttered Navalny's name.
Huh.
There's a long list of euphemisms that's been used over the years. That gentleman. Now they've, back when he was in Berlin trying to get better, they would call him the Berlin patient. And just a long list of these phrases. He's almost like Voldemort in Harry Potter. He's this creature who doesn't have a name, who can't be named on TV. They started to use his name on TV, and Putin's spokesperson recently started using his name, but Putin still has never uttered his name. And so he kind of just tries to dismiss it with a smirk. There are these people who want to cause trouble, and they run around, and they don't want anything good for our country, and we're aware they exist, but they're not gonna make a difference.
Is there anybody in the West, in the United States, who's remotely comparable to this guy?
I haven't seen one, no, because I mean, in terms of like ideology and like policy proposals and stuff, you can't really find a comparable person because the situation is different, the context is different. You
Yeah.
know, who is trying to, change the American system to be a democratic one? That's already kind of there. You can argue that the two-party system is flawed and this and that, but it's still a completely different landscape. But just in terms of the kinds of things he's been doing and with success, I really can't think of anybody, and it's kind of confusing to me. I guess it is because you have a functioning system. If somebody wants to make a difference in the political sphere, they have these like routes to go. You try to be a congressman, or you try to run in local elections, try to be governor, and then you climb the ladder, and this infrastructure exists, and you work within that system. And in Russia, that is not possible, and so you need to think kind of from scratch, come up with solutions that are not offered to you.
Do
And
Russians?
he's been,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
Question I was going to ask is: do Russians really want freedom? Do they? Or I mean, I assume that a lot of Russians still love Putin. They love the idea of this strongman, authoritarian figure who's taking care of the country and keeping the enemies at bay, and that this isn't a country that has much of an experience of democratic freedom, or any experience, I guess, and maybe the little bit of experience that they have had is upsetting, that it leads to chaos and anarchy and gangster criminals and this sort of thing. Is this one of the things that the opposition movement is up against?
This is a very difficult question, a very complex question, because what would you base an answer to this question? There are no free elections, so you can't compare, the support for this guy over that guy in the
Yeah.
context of actual electoral process.
Hmm.
And without that, if you ask, you can say that this number of people support Putin, even if you decide that you're just going to trust the polls, though I wouldn't say that's necessarily wise. You need to think about what this poll means. What does a person mean when they say, I support Putin, when there's nobody who Putin competes against? It's closer to something like, I don't want a revolution,
Right.
than I want a different guy in the office. And yeah, there's quite a bit of that. But I don't know. It's very. It seems like these kinds of conversations to me seem very, very theoretical, and you're kind of making it up when you try to generalize like this and say Russians want this or Russians want that. It's not a question that really Russians are facing. Do you support Putin or not? Nobody's asking you. Putin doesn't need your approval to stay in power, to continue being in power. And so these questions become important when your opinion starts to matter. And in current situation, to not support Putin, you need to take active actions that can land you in jail. And that's a high bar.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that I wanted to try to talk to you about is this thing that happened. So I was, as you know, I'm out of the city. I'm like 40 kilometers away from the city, in a place where there's just like snow and fences and horse riding. And so when I found out that Navalny was given that sentence, I didn't have the option. The last time around, when this kind of thing happened, the feeling you get in that situation is a hard one, is a heavy one. It's you're, for me and for people who have participated in these things, in either the protests or donated money, or in some way they're connected to this attempt to change the situation. When one of yours is grabbed by the police and put in a cage, you take it personally because it could have been you, because it's somebody who has been doing what you've been trying to do, but better and more, right? And so you want to help somehow. You want to not let it happen, but you don't have any power. And so the last time that it happened, I went to the spontaneous protest in the center of the city in Moscow at the time. But even that, it wasn't like, well, I'm going to go show up and we'll change it. It was something that you do out of desperation. You just can't sit at home when one of your people is being put in jail. And so you go and you try to make a difference, but you don't have a lot of hope.
Mm-hmm.
And then this time around, I didn't even have that, right? Because I'm over here and I was just sitting here by myself with the dog, throwing my firewood into the wood burning stove and trying to think what is the appropriate course of action, and is there an appropriate course of action? And I think that feeling is very common. So again, a lot of people were at these protests, and a lot of people were not actively participating, but again, more than 100 million views to that Putin Palace video. Mm-hmm. And the country has been, over the last few years, it has been going further and further into authoritarianism, and kind of bizarre kind of authoritarianism. There are new laws, like I told you about, like my precarious kind of situation with the laws about the agent of what the foreign agents
right
thing. And there are many things like that. Mm-hmm. After this wave of protests, one of the people who's in jail now for 25 days is an editor-in-chief of media organization, a website that reports on all this stuff, and he was given 25 days for retweeting something that a different person tweeted, which was mostly a joke about like the likeness of the guy who retweeted the thing to like a rock musician. But also in that tweet there was an image that said there is a rally at a certain day at a certain time. And so he's put in jail for 25 days for retweeting somebody else's tweet that just said that there's going to be a rally, because the rally is not sanctioned, so you can't invite people to go to it. The degree of this kind of approach from the authorities has been rising, and so a lot of people are unhappy. And needless to say, there's also COVID, and the economy is not doing that great because of that, and so forth. So I think there are a lot of people who are unhappy, and a lot of people who would like to change the situation, but there are no legal ways to do that. And so you feel, helpless or not. So that's kind of like the question: how do you feel, and what do you do, and what do you see in the situation, and how do you see your role in it? And a lot of people, it's always been the case in Russia since the late Soviet Union. A lot of people are just geared on, I need to leave this place. A lot of people are leaving, and then many more people are just talking about it endlessly, and that is a frustrating part of the experience for me. I hate these conversations about like, this country is a shithole, I need to leave, we all should leave, and then nobody is actually doing anything about that. But so you end up in the situation. I was here when I heard the news, and I went through this like trajectory of feelings and thoughts on the issue. Um, Starting out with this feeling of helplessness and ending with a conviction to do more of my own thing, like what I'm doing, whatever it is that I think is the important thing to do generally, which seems to be, getting high and thinking about shit and writing things down and drawing things and talking to you. And, I didn't end up in this place like doing that for no reason. I actually do think this is important, and I actually do think this is what I'm better at than some other things, and maybe uniquely positioned to do the thing that I'm doing. Right? Everybody's finding their own answers to what to do with life, and so after some period of this, helplessness, I ended up feeling kind of inspired by the situation, and in a sense that if I'm not doing what Navalny is doing, and I wouldn't be doing like it, I never tried to become the political leader and organize a movement, and I'm not gonna. This is not what I think is my role. But if I'm not doing that, then I better do the thing that I do instead well.
Mhm.
And so it's just weird to think about these, these trajectories. I ended up, so I stayed up late, and I did find a tiny little bit of marijuana that was left in my house, and I smoked that, and I thought about shit, and I wrote things down, and and that is something that I do, and I ended up in this place of, I think for the first time, taking it seriously not just taking it seriously, but taking it, approaching my own work, as frivolous as the description of that work may sound, as like civic duty, as something that, if I want to help the situation, I want to make the world better, I need to find my way. I've made some progress over the years. This is where I am right now. I need to be doing it well. And I ended up thinking back to Terence McKenna's calls for action, which were all about the need for good ideas. His whatever he's talking about, he's always talking about psychedelics. But his approach was, the reason the psychedelic experience is important is it's not for your self-directed psychotherapy. This is not for you to figure out your personal relationships. You're a representative of a species, and when you go into a psychedelic experience, you are faced with things that stir imagination, and you can find a good idea in there, and you need to get that idea, bring it back into ordinary reality, and share it with others. And so I was sitting here in my wooden house here, smoking that little bit of weed, and thinking, I got to be thinking about shit. And I actually did come up with one specific political, like maybe one of the most straightforwardly political ideas that I've ever had, which is, in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, there are going to be presidential elections in 2024. These three countries have been dealing with with what we're dealing here with Putin in different ways. So Ukraine has gone over a few of these revolutions or coups or whatever you want to call it, of change of the regime, throwing the person in power out. And it's not like they're doing great, but the bit about changing the power and being able to actually elect your leaders, that they managed to figure out. Belarus, Lukashenko has been in power longer than Putin has, and just recently, 2020, they had huge protests that nobody expected. I think in Minsk, in the capital of the country, there were like 10% of the population of the city were in the streets, and it came sort of out of nowhere, and it looked very inspiring, and it to a lot of people seemed like, how do you continue to govern when your entire nation clearly is not happy to see you? And then it turned out that it's not actually that difficult. You just need the police and the army on your side, which he seems to have. And so Lukashenko's still there, though he did promise that he's not going to be running for re-election. Of course, these kinds of promises can be overturned. And then we have what we have. And I guess if Navalny just serves this sentence and gets out at the end of it, then he'll be out before 2024. And so 3 countries that are the fates of which have been intertwined in different ways, like Ukraine and Russia, are now in very difficult position vis-a-vis each other because Putin took Crimea, and there was actual war, and there are regions of the country that are still these gray zones that don't belong to either Russia or Ukraine, and there's nothing good happening there. But I thought, after smoking that little amount of weed, if you manage to get these democratic movements within those 3 countries on the same page, and you get them to act as a united front against Putin and Lukashenko, and you get 3 different countries with these grassroots movements that are already there, to, let's say you have 3 candidates that all say, the guy running in Ukraine and the guy or gal running in Belarus say, if I'm elected president, I will not consider let's say you were talking about the Ukrainian candidate. They say that Lukashenko and Putin are not going to be treated as legitimate presidents if they come to power in 2024. And the person in Belarus says that about Putin, and the person in Russia says that about Lukashenko. And you have this like 3-way front coming together. Then not only the movements within each country has the support of people in neighboring countries, but you actually might be able to heal some of the wounds that the, let's say, Ukrainian-Russian relationship has suffered over the years because of the war in Ukraine. Because then you're aligning the people, right, the democratically minded grassroots movements of the countries together without having to, actually one to subjugate another. Let's all deal with what we're suffering from in our individual countries, but let's help one another. So there you go. This is the most straightforwardly political thing that I could come up with using my method, which is get high, think about shit, stay up too late, write things down, draw things, and talk to friends over the internet.
Well, so yeah, this is really interesting. I think the public realm, politics has been more intrusive over the last 4 years in the United States than it has been in a long time. It was really intrusive in the 60s when I was a teenager. And, because there was a Vietnam War, and since I'm male, I was eligible for the Vietnam draft. So
right.
It was pretty hard to ignore what was going on in my country and in the world back then. I think it's much easier now. So, even under Donald Trump, if, I'm an older white bourgeois guy, if I want to, I can tune all that shit out. And I did to a certain extent. What I find really interesting about what you're saying, this kind of decision you made, is that one way or another, what is going on in your country gives you a certain moral obligation. Even if you don't address it directly in your work, it affects your work. you feel as though, okay, maybe you're not going to be going in the street or working as an activist, a democratic activist directly, but whatever you do has got to be informed by that. And maybe you sort of, what you do has to be worthwhile given the demands of what's going on in your country, the sort of ethical demands on everybody over there. And this is something that I've struggled with a lot. I just finished writing a column for Scientific American. It'll probably be coming out, I don't know, in a month or so, on realism. So realism is used in lots of different ways. I'm talking about what's sometimes called scientific realism, just the idea that science discovers the world, that our scientific knowledge is a kind of map of reality. And that's often called naive realism by philosophers who say that, it's ridiculous. That our theories have nothing to do with what's really out there in the world. So there's this whole debate, and I go back and forth on that. It's I'm pretty committed to scientific realism, in part because the end of science. My argument depends on believing that science is discovering the world, and at a certain point, we get diminishing returns from that. But then there are other forms of anti-realism that come from mysticism and psychedelics, where this world is like a movie, and it's like a simulation. It's the Matrix. They're all different versions of that. That ultimate reality is this kind of field of consciousness. Whatever. I mean, you've heard my theory that this is just, the creation is motivated by the insanity of God and his eternal identity crisis, all that kind of stuff. And at the end of this piece, so I'm sort of weighing all this. I've been going through this sort of crisis of faith in science. And at the end, I say that what I'm committed to is the reality of human suffering and injustice, which is actually not sufficiently acknowledged either by particle physics, which says that ultimate reality is, quantum fields and whatever general relativity describes as the state of the universe. And reality also isn't reflected in like a Matrix type model that says that we're just living in some kind of crazy movie invented by evil aliens. In the case, that's, I think Terence McKenna might have said that kind of thing. It's also the idea of what's called the simulation hypothesis now, which is very popular. And those ideas are fun to think about. I've certainly spent a lot of time thinking about them and talking about them and writing about them myself. But I feel like the grown-up part of me that recognizes that I'm a citizen of the world, and especially because I've been very fortunate, I have certain responsibilities. That grown-up part of me says any kind of metaphysics that doesn't keep coming back to human suffering and injustice and inequality, these horrible problems that we have, isn't a good metaphysics. It's even immoral. And whatever your belief system is, or whatever you decide to do with your life, you've got to acknowledge that there are real people out there other than you that are struggling and are often in pain, and that you can't just ignore them. It doesn't mean you have to actually be going out and doing stuff for them. I'm also not a natural social activist. I don't like being part of crowds or groups. I like doing my own thing in solitude and just thinking about stuff. But I still feel that moral obligation that I think that you're talking about as well. But then the question is, what do you do with that? If you have that feeling, how is that manifested in the work that you're doing in your life? The way that you are making a living, the way you interact with other people around you. And that's something I sort of go back and forth on all the time.
I have two reactions. One, you always keep, like, whenever you start talking about these kinds of things, there's this way of looking at the world, there's that the way of looking at the world, but we can't ignore the suffering. I always feel, I mean, I could probably answer that question myself, but why do you single out suffering? Why not just the entirety of human experience? Why can't you say you shouldn't ignore the joy and the suffering and the love and the heartache and, you know, everything that you can, that the human person can feel?
The suffering is what, to me, necessitates a kind of moral reaction. If I live in utopia and everybody is happy, and we're in a psychedelic, the ultimate psychedelic utopia. We've solved global warming. We've gotten rid of racism and sexism, and everybody has, we've got some fantastic minimum wage. I feel like you can go and cultivate your own garden, and that's fine. It's when there are obvious problems in the world that need to be fixed that that's what prevents me from just like thinking about, ridiculous interpretations of quantum mechanics all day. I like that. It's fun for me. I'm like have that kind of nerdy mind, but then I also, have to care about like the huge chasm between the bullshit rhetoric that's spouted by leaders of my country all the time, today and going back hundreds of years, and what's actually the reality, and especially for certain people of color,
Right.
Women, but everybody as well. So that's I mean, yeah, if you're sort of an artist or an intellectual, you want to take in the totality of life. So yeah, the happiness too, the joy and the beauty and all that stuff. It's really good. But morality and suffering are linked in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other reaction that I had is to maybe try to share the thing that's been on my mind, sort of my unfinished answer to the question. So what do you do? How do I make my work encompass both the things you're talking about? How do I, take my share of responsibility and do my part of the work? And yet, to me, I don't want to just get stuck in that realm of like, I'm going to ignore everything except for the human suffering that I can find around and devote myself entirely to that. I think you could even say there's a kind of an obligation to not ignore the good parts about this existence, right? Because if you just focus on suffering and not even try to have just the good parts here as well, then what is the suffering for? Then there's nothing except for different shades of unideal situations, imperfect situations.
Are you gonna? Do you want to finish that thought? Because I've got something that just popped into my head.
Go ahead. I'm gonna try to pitch a thing to you, an idea that.
Go ahead.
I'm not
pitch
sure
your.
if I'm gonna be able to articulate.
Pitch. Oh, okay. I'll just try to tell you this quickly.
Yeah.
So right before our conversation, I was at the dentist, and this is kind of related to what you were talking about. I'm going through this elaborate. Anyway, I was at the dentist, and I've been there a lot lately, and it's no fun. So I'm in the dentist chair, and the dentist is kind of coming and going and like drilling my tooth and then going off and doing something and coming back and drilling my tooth again. And whenever he goes away, I'm trying to read. I've got a Kindle. Here's my Kindle here, and I'm reading a novel. It's actually like a memoir, as all his works are. A memoir by Jack Kerouac called Big Sur. It's about his descent into acute alcoholism, and it's pretty bad. It's pretty grim, but with flashes of joy and then flashes of absolute despair and ugliness. And meanwhile, there's this TV screen in the room that's on Fox News, and this crazy Georgia congresswoman is on it because Fox thinks that she's great, I guess. She's the one that they just stripped of, she's the one that said that the Jews were causing fires in California with space lasers. You've heard about this woman, right?
Is she the QAnon lady?
Yeah, QAnon. But she's beyond QAnon. She just believes in crazy shit. And so the point I'm trying to make is I'm like experiencing multiple different levels of reality, that drilling my tooth. So I'm dealing with this physical pain. I'm trying to distract myself by reading Jack Kerouac and who's going through this like dark night of the soul. And then meanwhile, this insane American politician is like yelling all this just crazy nonsense from the TV screen, and I'm like, wow, what the fuck? And then when things like this happen to me, I go like, Jesus Christ, it's so weird being a human. I mean, this happens all the time. There are all these intersecting realities, and I think the responsibility, if you're trying to, I'm a writer, so I feel like it's my responsibility to try to to convey the totality of experience and not ignore any of this shit. I could concentrate on that crazy lady from Georgia. I could just be, thinking about Jack Kerouac and this poor alcoholic son of a bitch, and or I could just be focusing on my own experience, getting my tooth drilled, and what a drag that is. Whatever, and then my dentist is saying crazy shit to me meanwhile. But somehow to convey it all and make it coherent or incoherent or whatever, but to express that as the totality of human existence is something that I kind of feel a responsibility to do as well. And I think that's kind of what you were just saying.
I think so, yeah. And I would add to it that this thing that you end up with, you express, you write a book or you, whatever, say a thing. I always want it to be something useful for the person who would read or hear or interact with. Right? I don't like it when the thing is just leaves you. I mean, even if it can be useful by leaving you in an empty space where you need to come to your own conclusions. But I want it to be not in vain. I want it to be something that helps. Before I try to do my pitch though, what you were saying just now made me think of a Navalny related thing. So when he came out of the coma and he started doing his first interview afterwards, he described some hallucinations and weird states of mind that he passed through on his way out of the coma, but not fully here yet. And there's one that I thought he made a mistake, metaphysical kind of. I think he was being a naive realist about his own experience when he related to an interviewer. So he was saying that there was a period, I hope that I'm not misremembering this, there was a period when he felt that his out, he felt that the coma is over, and he woke up in this place, and he felt that he's interacting with a reality, but the reality was very weird. And I think most likely he was already like talking to people, or at least people were talking to him, and he was like blinking back at them. But the reality that he was in, which did seem very real at the time, was that he was, I forget who he was fighting with, but so it's like his chief of staff appears and says, Alexey, you were in a coma, but you're back. Don't worry about it. There's a Japanese doctor over here, and he will build you a new back, I think. And it seemed it was the thing that the doctor would build for him was like in the Spider-Man movies, there's a character with like these metal arms coming out of his back.
Yeah,
and so the Japanese doctor would build him this. And so he's like describing the situation that later turned out to be a hallucination. He did use the word when talking about this, and I think some other episode like this, he did say that it was reality. At the time, it felt like reality. It was realer than, what I'm experiencing now. But still, the way he framed it was, this was a bizarre, detour, a hallucination, and now we're back to doing the thing. And I kept thinking to me, the ontological status of those two different realities. One, yes, it's completely bizarre. The Japanese doctor is going to build you a metal back. But the one you're in, you're a Russian oppositional figure who was flying over Siberia when secret FSB poison took effect, and then the plane landed in Omsk, or in Tomsk, I guess, in Tomsk, and then they drove him to Omsk. And then you spend a few days there, and by lucky coincidences almost, the plane landed at the right time, and the doctors at the ambulance decided to do the right thing. They, thought that he's poisoned and not something else, and so they gave him an antidote. And then your family somehow managed to get you out of that hospital in Omsk to Germany, and you woke up after a series of hallucinations. It ends up with he's in the medical gown, and the leader of Germany, Angela Merkel, shows up in his room and starts talking to him in Russian because she knows Russian, right? All of that is as bizarre as the Spider-Man thing that you were experiencing for a little bit.
Yeah,
those two realities are like, one of them is not sillier than the other.
Yeah. Well, and, I mean, pretty much, if you see it in the right way, you don't even have to have that. Is very freaky for that guy. But the thing about, this is one of the things that psychedelics does, and mystical experiences in general. They make you step back. You could see this moment that we're in right now. It's like really fucking weird. What are the odds? Like, the way I like to describe it to my students is, think of the universe as a giant bag of particles. You've got this big bag, and you're God, and you just shake the bag, and then like, in one little corner of the bag, there's this right here.
Yeah.
You and I talking about this stuff. It's like you can't. It's beyond infinite. It's like infinite to the infinite power. And yet here we are.
Yeah. And anyway, I'm not sure what the conclusion. I think that anecdote that I just gave is important. The thing that, like, this person who is involved in this whole story, and there's a lot of suffering that he's experiencing. His brother was in jail for a couple of years for no reason other than that he shares the last name, and he has a wife and children, and his parents went through various difficulties, and then all around this, there's this whole movement, and people were imprisoned, and it's all very real.
Yeah.
And he's currently somewhere in some cell thinking, 2-3 more years of this now.
Right.
But the fact that he experienced that other thing, that's more bizarre, and it's just fun to talk about. But that other thing was really, it's a different way to present the situation. It's his consciousness used different images and substituted the one, some of the elements of his heroic tale with elements from a different culture, from a movie, from a computer game or whatever, and mixed it up and presented a different narrative. The fact that these, not only you can, sort of like come up with a metaphor for what's happening with you, and it would be a different way of telling it. No, you can actually experience that reality. For him, I think he said that was happening for a couple of days for him. Like he existed in a different version of the situation. There's something important for me there, that even though the suffering, as you say, is real, and all of these other things, I'm not trying to discard them. I'm not trying to make them less meaningful. But the fact that they can be experienced in these completely different ways, and it could be weirder than that. I mean, I've done drugs that give you images and situations that you're not going to be able to relay in a couple of weeks. You're going to be, spending the next year thinking about what was that and how do I use it. It seems very meaningful. I have no idea what it is, though. These kinds of experiences are out there as well. There's something important to me about that. This is one of the challenges of the kind of creative work that you're talking about. You do want to encompass more than just one of these stories. You want to somehow have multiple elements in mind or on the page as you're trying to express the thing.
The challenge is that you might have these things, all these different things juxtaposed in whatever your work is. You're fortunate that you're an artist as well as a writer, but whether anybody else is going to make sense of it or want to look at it or read it, that's another question. So the geniuses managed to make it all come together. And you can't say, you look at the different pieces and it's like, what the hell? But it comes together into a whole that somehow works. But even the geniuses at some point sort of go off into uncharted territory. I just, I wrote this piece on, it was kind of, oh, that's right. I sent this thing to you. Well, it's going to be published this weekend. So by the time this comes out, it'll be on Scientific American. I'm trying to think about, my own thoughts, because I just wrote this book that supposedly is about my thoughts, and I realized that there are thoughts that we express here and that we express even to ourselves before we express them to others. But then there's this substrate of like really weird shit that we can't even understand or we can't even really pay attention to. William James has this wonderful metaphor. He says it's like trying to understand the thoughts at the bottom of your mind is like trying to study the darkness by shining a light on it. As soon as you shine the light on it, what you're trying to study is dissipated. Somebody who tried as hard as anybody to convey these thoughts kind of that are always seething at the bottom of our consciousness that we can't even express to ourselves. It's James Joyce. And so in Ulysses, Joyce, he did a pretty amazing job. I'm a big Joyce fan. A lot of people are not into it, but to me, he's definitely one of the greatest writers ever, if not the greatest. Certainly the best at conveying stream of consciousness, what's going through our heads, kind of when nobody's watching. Ulysses is an extremely difficult work, but even that was, he's sort of curating thoughts and presenting them. He actually cares. He wants readers to be able to understand it, sort of. Finnegan's Wake, his last work, I don't know if you've ever looked at that. It's like opaque. It's unintelligible. I read it in a course in college, and it sort of teaches you how to read it, and it puts you in a dream state, and you're sort of absorbing it, but not in a way that has anything to do with ordinary intelligible consciousness. And even Joyce's friends were like, what the fuck, man? What are we supposed to do with this? And Joyce said, I'm trying to convey something that cannot be conveyed with regular sentences and grammar and syntax. I'm trying to go deeper than that. And I think he did as good a job as anybody can do, but it's a book that is pretty much impossible to read. So that's the challenge of the artist, is to try to convey that stuff. There are some people who are good at it. I think David Lynch, the filmmaker, it's like he's got some images and you go, what the fuck? What is that? And it works because you look at it and it's just like weird. It has nothing to do with anything, but you feel like he's pulled that out of the murk at the bottom of your own mind, right? Yeah. It's his mind, but somehow you recognize it as something that he could have pulled out of your head too. But there's a limited audience for that kind of stuff.
It makes me think of two. One, like a full-blown psychedelic experience. Another is something that we were meaning to talk about last time, the glossolalia thing. I think the first one I've told you about, maybe. It was a mushroom trip that I had, I don't know, a long time ago with a couple of my friends. And it was my first mushroom trip. And in the early stage, I remember we sort of went into different parts of the room and got quiet and were just thinking our own thoughts. Then I can't remember what happened, but it was very funny. And the three of us laughed for a long time. And then that laughter for me morphed into some kind of monkey noises. And I was so amused and happy with the monkey noises that I resolved that I'm not only going to communicate in those for now. And I actually had a reason for it. It wasn't just like pure amusement. It was that I felt that once you start using words, 3 words in, you are not expressing the thing that's worthy of being expressed anymore. You're now in the maze of these words. The sentence already has a little bit of a structure, and you need to follow that structure. And there's only so many words that would make sense to put after the word that you just uttered. And then a couple of sentences in, you're completely removed. You're just in the world of words now. And the thing that you were trying to talk about, the ineffable thing, is completely out of the picture forever. And so I had this like conversation with a guy who was not on board with my approach. He kept using sentences, and I was like, no, dude, we should do the monkey noises instead. We what is the word? Eventually compromised and had, I don't know how long it lasted, but for a while we spoke in single words. Like I would say a noun, and he would think about it and reply with a different noun, and I would think about it and reply with a different noun. And every time he kept trying to get into the whole language thing and form phrases and sentences, and I kept catching him doing that and going like, "You're doing the thing again. This is not productive." If you want to be able to discuss the thing that is worth discussing, we can't do the language game.
I was telling you before, I'm reading Big Sur by Jack Kerouac, and there's the scene that I just read, actually while I was in the dentist office, where he was in this cabin in Big Sur by himself at first, and then he started getting really lonely. So then he brought all these friends back, and they're all binge drinking, and everybody's passed out except Kerouac and this crazy Japanese Zen poet, and they are it's like 3 or 4 in the morning, and they are having this back and forth, and it's supposed to be nonsensical. They're saying it's supposed to be the crazier the better. And so one of it just like spews out all this crazy nonsense. I can't pretend to do this. And then the other one just goes blah 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 back, and they were using words, but it sounds very much like what you're describing, or even like monkey noises. I love that, and the idea is that with this you are, you're reaching some kind of deeper level of reality. What's interesting about the Kerouac book is that it's all ironic because he's clearly falling apart. So he's doing this in one way, he's thinking, wow, this is really cool, man. This is like poetry. This is really beat. But, he's already told you enough about himself that he's descending into an severe alcoholic psychosis and depression.
There's a book like that in Russian that's very important to me, which I wish I could recommend you, but I looked at the English translation and it doesn't do it justice. Though, actually, I might have sent you a link to a documentary. Have I? About the guy Yerofeev, Moscow to Petushki is the documentary. It's this alcoholic who ended up having like throat cancer, and so in the documentary, the interviews he gives has to hold him.
You sent me that like a year ago, maybe?
Yeah. The book that is like, they read certain passages from the book in that documentary.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. It is a chronicle of a descent into alcoholic, delirium state. But that book is very important to me. It expresses certain things about reality and the human condition, human existence, that he's done it better than most. Hey, the other thing that I wanted to,
go ahead. I was just going to say, I've got to. We have to wrap this up fairly soon, but so I wanted to make sure you were going to say you had a thing you wanted to say.
Right. The pitch I'll leave for another conversation then, and maybe it'll be more coherent than it is now. But I will try to quickly tell you the glossolalia experience, because it's just related to all of this. And this was not really, I was not in a really like altered state of consciousness. As I've told you before, I'm experimenting microdosing Amanita muscaria and Amanita pantherina, and I've taken, I guess, a double dose. It's still a very small dose. It doesn't really affect you that much. And I had a whole work day and performed my duties properly, and everything was fine. But then in the evening, I took a shower, and while taking the shower, I often like sing, or I do make noises generally, but I think it was the mushrooms that allowed me to try to do something that's like human speech, but without the words. And I did that for at least half an hour, maybe a little more than half an hour. And it turned out to be very difficult. It's not easy at all because the two kind of traps that I got into were either silence of the same kind as, like when you're in some kind of an awkward social situation where it would be better if you said something, but you think, what should I say? What is appropriate to say? It's weird to have that feeling when the whole point of the exercise is there doesn't need to be meaning. You just need to make any kind of noise, man.
Right.
And still you kind of go, yeah, but what kind of noise? And you get kind of trapped in that. Or once you do start making, any kind of string of syllables that aren't connected to anything, as soon as they form into something like a word, there's a length to it and a rhythm to it. Me, in my experience at that moment, I end up repeating the thing or doing slight variations. But so it's very hard to get to anything anywhere close to the richness of actual human speech with all of these different sounds, different combinations of them. And we've been doing this for an hour now, a little more than an hour, and it's just effortlessly, there's a very rich landscape of these sounds. If you don't have language to lean on, if you don't have the words and the sentence structure to lean on, you end up, at least initially, I think maybe if you practice, you get better at this, but that first half hour was very difficult to do any kind of thing like that. And then what helped is I would think about a Bob Dylan song and try to feel the mood of the song, and then try to express that in nonsensical sounds. And then I would, it would be a little easier, and I would start saying, those things for a little bit. Still would get stuck, and then, like after half an hour of doing that, and there was a lot of shrugging and a lot of kind of like going back and forth, as like if what I was saying actually meant anything, then it would be like I said something and then I said, but on the other hand, there's this other thing. Except I was not saying anything, and then I didn't say on the other hand, and there was no other thing. It was just all noises. And so at the end of this experiment, for half an hour I did that, and then I sat down and tried to write down what the emotion behind the things that behind the noises I was making, what that emotion was. And I wish I had, actually, I don't know if it's worth trying to take a look at the note that I made, but it morphed the note in an interesting way. It started out with me trying to express the emotion behind me making the noises. And I think it was something like, something is being expressed or something is trying to be expressed, but it's not clear if there is anything to express and who's doing the expressing, something along those lines. And then after a few sentences of me just trying to be accurate at describing a state I was in, at emotional, or I don't know if emotional is the right word, some kind of state behind the noises. After a few sentences, it started to seem like a premise for a metaphysics. Like what I'm trying to, put in words now instead of nonsensical noises is my description of what is going on generally, on this planet. And it's something like something is being expressed, but it's not clear whether there is anything to express. And it's not clear who is expressing the thing and whether there's somebody to then witness or hear what's been said. And so I guess that's it. I didn't come to a conclusion after that. That's just something that happened that is going to be a part of something else, I'm sure, down the road.
Okay, that sounds really cool. You've got to keep going into that. That sounds really interesting. Just a couple of things that popped into my head as you were speaking. First of all, I feel like there's some kind of synchronicity with this Jack Kerouac novel. He's got when he's alone in Big Sur, he spends his time down on the beach. This is California beach, big surf crashing in, and he's sort of scared by it. It's so wild. He's so alone there. He's overwhelmed by the force of nature, but he's trying to write what the waves sound like. So he's writing all these sort of nonsense words, trying to turn what the waves are saying into human sound. So that's like, sounds kind of like what you're talking about. Just another thing that I thought of is that when I took ayahuasca like 20 years ago, and in the deepest part of the trip, I felt like my eyes were closed. Actually, it didn't matter whether my eyes were closed or open. I was sort of seeing the same stuff. It was like these sort of geometric forms that were all interlocking and moving around, and I felt like it was the machine code of my own mind. And in the same way that if you ever hear, it's possible to hear the machine code. For example, in the old days, you'd hear signals going through a modem, and it'd just be this kind of chatter, staticky chatter. It's a language that we can't understand, even though, of course, it's coded human language.
I remember at that time, after a little bit, you start to distinguish the different kinds of that sound, meaning which speed the connection is at. And you would get upset if it's this kind of sound, and then get happy about the higher speed.
Well, so I feel like you're it's this idea that this is related to what you were saying before about language. You're with your friend, and you wanted to sort of go do something other than ordinary human language. Ordinary language, even the kind we're using here, it's our means of liberation. It's our means of escaping ourselves and understanding the world and understanding each other, but it's also our prison. And so, artists try to create new languages that help us see things that ordinary language is blind to, or prevents us from seeing. And I feel like that's what you're trying to do that. So,
I have
keep
a related
doing
thought. Yeah, thanks. I'm going to try. I have a related thought. I'll let you go after this.
Okay.
But at the same time, when Navalny is put in jail, and I'm thinking what I'm supposed to be doing, I had a random thought. I have this thing. I didn't come up with this, but I ended up internalizing, I think, to a certain extent, the notion that ideas could be seen as living entities. That ideas can be seen as a thing that's alive, that you can interact with, that you can build a relationship with, that you can do something for, and it can do something for you. And then I thought, I guess that's not I don't know if it's not original, but it's not a new thought for me. I kept circling around it for the last few years, that a language can be seen as a living entity as well. And then the political dimension was, I was thinking, about my situation. So I know two languages, English and Russian. I use them differently. I use them for different things. And then I thought that maybe the right way to think about it is these, let's call them creatures, the English language and the Russian language, they are different to begin with, and then they are in different situations. And you can see what one language is better at and what a language is deprived of. And I thought, like, I'm doing all of my, public, like these conversations that I did with you, or interviews that I've done before, or the writing that I do, that is all in English. And there must be a reason for that, and there are probably a bunch. But one of them is Russian for now, like right now, is not very well suited for public speaking, because certain kinds of public speaking lands you in jail, right? And then in some ways there's just not as much public discourse to begin with, and so using English, I can lean on the things that other people have said, or the more even than the things that people have said, but like the ways people have spoken. And then I heard that, and I sort of, like, within language, you learn another language. You hear enough Terence McKenna, and then it gives you a vocabulary to talk about psychedelic trips. You hear people talking about whatever political, social situations, and you develop a way of talking about those. There's less of that in Russia, and therefore in the Russian language. And therefore, to develop a way of talking about these things, you need to be one of the first people to develop that field that is not there yet. Which, again, Navalny, is one of the things he's doing, is he's developing political language in Russia. But the thing that I'm trying to get to is, if you think about the language as a living thing, a relatable thing that can also suffer or be not as free as it should be, then that gives you, a program, more things to be concerned about, and try to think of how I do it. And so for the first time, I thought of the Russian language as being in the same position as the Russian people are, right? Not having enough freedom. The Russian language has the potential to be a powerful thing in terms of politics, in terms of talking about some of the things that you just can't talk about publicly in Russia right now. And so it's underdeveloped, and you can see it as, like a person who's imprisoned, or an animal that's in a zoo, or whatever, a creature in a disadvantaged position and suffering because of it, and lacking in development in certain areas because something was done to it. Something is limiting it and not letting it develop to its full potential. So that's just another
that's
starting point for something.
That's a far out idea. I love it. All right. Well, so I don't know. I feel like we always end with more to talk about, but that's a good thing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So then I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks, and we'll have more open-ended things that will lead to another conversation down the road.
Yeah, and in the meantime, stay safe, okay?
I'm gonna try. Well, there are not gonna be any protests anytime soon. They're decided that the next attempts are gonna be made in spring and summer, because if you do more now, then you'll just have everybody who's involved in anything in jail, and then you can't do much.
Right.
So yeah.